hybrid meeting. The meeting is being recorded and will be available from the council chamber or from remote locations. Please could everybody ensure that the mobile phones are switched off or to silent mode. Members will have received an electronic copy of the agenda. I'll ask officers to present a summary of the key points. For the record, the agenda can be viewed on the council's website. Members and officers will be speaking at various points during the meeting, and those speaking may switch their microphones and cameras on at that point. If any members of Cabinet are attending remotely, please ensure that your camera is kept on during the course of the meeting. Whether in the chamber or remote, if any member or officer wishes to raise a point or question, should press the hands up icon on the screen hand at the top right hand side of the Microsoft Teams windows, and I will come to you in the order I receive requests. Please lower your hand once you have finished speaking. The chat button has been disabled for this meeting. Please do not use your microphone until I invite you to do so. Officers from Democratic Services will be supporting the meeting and will be monitoring the use of microphones throughout the meeting, and where necessary will mute those not being used. I will also ask the officers to introduce themselves as and when I invite them to speak during the course of the meeting. Officers too should ensure microphones and cameras are switched off when not in use, please. We will now proceed to agenda business, and the first item is to receive apologies for absence from members. So all members of Cabinet are present for this meeting. We have had apologies from the Corporate Director for Communities, who is unwell, and I'd like to welcome the Head of Operations for the Communities Directorate, who is here in her stead. We will now receive declarations of interest in accordance with the Members' Code of Conduct applied to the Council in September 2008. Are there any declarations of interest? No? And if you do identify any during the course of the meeting, then please indicate at that point. So the first report on today's agenda is a report on the outcome of the consultation Shaping Bridgend's Future 2024. And this is a report of the Chief Officer for Finance, Performance and Change. Over to you, please, Carys.
Thank you very much, Leader. As you said, I'm Carys Lord and I'm the Chief Officer for Finance and Change. So the purpose of this report is to inform Cabinet of the outcome of the Shaping Bridgend's Future 2024 budget consultation process. The consultation asked citizens their views on what they consider should be the priority areas for allocating the budget for the forthcoming financial year, and to examine those views against funding provided by the Welsh Government. The public consultation exercise was undertaken over a 3-week period between the 15th of January and the 4th of February this year. Through the consultation, respondents were asked to share their views and priorities across a number of areas, including the principles behind the budget, whether we should reduce or close services, increasing charges and introducing new charges, reviewing services and related budgets, reviewing the use of assets and buildings, reviewing our contracts with external partners, reviewing agreements with external partners, the council tax levels, and whether or not the council is citizen-focused. Budget consultation exercises have been undertaken annually since 2013-2014, and this year's exercise built on that experience, as well as utilising a new digital engagement platform to drive new ways for people to participate and engage with the council. Therefore, a wide variety of methods were used to gain people's views, including surveys, a quick poll, social media, face-to-face drop-in sessions, as well as an explainer video, radio adverts, and some media releases. The audience for this consultation exercise was broad, including the general public and residents of the County Borough area, citizen panel members, elected members, staff of the council, businesses and the local media. In total, the consultation received 2,839 interactions from a combination of survey completions, with 2,813 being received via the online survey and 26 being submitted by paper. This is double the response rate achieved for last year's survey, despite the reduced period for that survey. All of the results of the consultation are detailed for you in Appendix A of this afternoon's report. So if I could just take you to those recommendations, please, Leader, where it's recommended that Cabinet note the outcome of the consultation with interested parties as detailed in the attached consultation report. Thank you.
Thank you for that report, Carys. Deputy Leader, please.
Thank you very much, Leader. Thank you very much for the report, Carys. I was interested to note some of the outcomes from our survey. I think one of the points that I would highlight, and I am pleased to see that we've had such a good response rate, considering previous efforts to get our public to engage with us. I think we've had a really good result this year, considering it's been for half the time. I think my only additional comment would be is, as a member of council, my offer would be that we, and I am offering, to hold a budget consultation in my own ward, but I think we need to start making those arrangements now for next year, because the engagement, we know that we're going to have to do the engagement. We know that we're going to get a settlement figure. We just don't know when that settlement figure is going to come. So I just think we could be slightly more organised in so much as we organise it now, because then we're expecting it. Thanks very much, Leader, and I'm happy to move the report.
Thank you for that, Deputy Leader. I don't know if you want to respond to that point, Carys, please.
Yeah, no, thank you for those comments, Deputy Leader. As you say, it's an annual requirement on us to consult with regards to the budget proposals. And as I said, we've learnt since we started this process more than 10 years ago, and we're happy to consider learning about new ways to make sure that we do engage people in a way that suits them. So we're happy to look at all options moving forward.
Thank you for that, Carys, and also the possibility of engaging at a different stage in the process, even though there is, of course, a risk that we don't have fully worked up proposals to share with the public if we do go earlier, and that is the dilemma, isn't it, about going early with consultation. But that is something that I'm sure will be considered as part of next year's process.
Yes, thank you, Lydia. And I think it's an important point that we need to make sure people across Bridgend understand our budget, how we're funded and what we spend the money on. So we could certainly start an engagement process early in the year, so that when we send this survey out in late December or January, people are responding to it in an informed way because they understand what we provide and what their costs to provide.
Thank you for that, Carys. Next, we have Councillor Blundell, please.
Yes, thank you, Leader, and thank you, Carys, for the report. And I'll second the Deputy Leader's recommendation there. I'm just wondering, it's really to build on the Deputy Leader's point, what have we learned from this budget consultation that we're going to move forward for next year and so on and so on? Because these are every year, as the Leader said, and they are live things. This is a very different consultation to, I think, the one I did in my first ever term as a councillor back in 2017. So I'm just wondering, what have we learned? Where are we going with this forward, as it is such a live document? Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Blundell. Carys, please.
I think some key messages we've learned from this one is to have a concise survey so that people don't have to spend too long answering it. To really focus in on the issues that we would like people's opinion for, because that's what will help to shape our budget in the long run. We've used the new platform, which has been successful in increasing our numbers, But I think it's about making sure that we have a range of different methods that we use to engage with people, because we don't all engage in the same way. So I think it's about building on that really for next year. We had a video this year which actually was quite well hit. We had about 150 people looking at that video during the process. So I think it is about trialing new methods, but not forgetting we need a breadth of tools really to get the people to respond as much as they can.
Thank you for that, Caris. Next, we have Councillor Williams, please.
Yeah, thank you, Leader, and thank you, Caris, for the presenting the report. It's very valuable information we get from the public consultations, and I'm quite pleased, I suppose, that the principles that we operate in under are sort of quite heavily supported by the public. That's good, and also our direction of travel over full cost review, full cost recovery of services, and also the remodelling of services and review of assets. I think it's important that we use the information we gather here now also to inform the future direction of travel for the MTFS. And I'm sure we're going to bear in mind that, because we have got a consultation review going on currently, and I get what the deputy leader said, but I think it's important that we sort of continue this information feedback then with the public and continue that conversation with them. I'm just going to touch on the council tax one, because it says there 64% of respondents favour keeping council tax as low as possible. And I think we all agree with that. We all want to keep council tax as low as possible, because the alternative is cuts in services, and sometimes those cuts take us into a territory that we cannot meet our statutory obligations. And so we always bear that in mind. So it is about delivery risk. And I just want to assure the public that, keeping council tax as low as possible, that is the name of the game here. So thank you, Leader.
Thank you for that, Councillor Williams. Next, we have Councillor Spanzik, please.
Thank you, Leader. And as for the consultation, there's definitely something I've learned this time around, and it is surprising, but it's the net zero pledge question, which, rightly or wrongly, has come out as the highest one there, where the public see they're happy to see cuts in that area. So I think while accepting that's what they feel, there's a job to do for us to discuss and explain more what we're doing, because perhaps not net zero, but decarbonisation as a general. We've signed up as a council to our net zero credentials and declare the climate emergency. We can't ignore that. We have a strategy in place, albeit we haven't got all the cash needed, as most councils in Wales and the UK haven't got all the cash needed to work towards net zero at this moment in time, 2030. But we do have a decarbonisation job to do in reducing our carbon footprint. But it shouts out to say that we need to do a better job, a more detailed job of working with the public to explain what we're doing, what they can do, and what we can all do together to reduce our impact on future generations. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Spanzik. It's a point well made. There's certainly more work that we need to do with the public. We know that there's a lot of support. There's lots of members of the public who are very committed to the net zero carbon agenda, but then there's others where we need to do some work with them to take them on that journey. I think that's fair to say. Councillor Williams, you didn't want to come back in. That's a legacy hand, so I'll bring Councillor Farr in next, please.
Thank you, Leader. Thanks, Caris. It's a really good report to read, and I'm really impressed with the different methods that we communicated with residents, and the fact that you use simple language and a youth version. My question is, how did we engage with the young people? I know we've kind of linked in with lots of panels and citizens. Did we link in with colleges, young people groups and things like that? And also I want to say that it's really pleasing to see the response we've had, that residents support our vision to protect our most vulnerables. The other thing is, we've had a good response compared to last year, but I think we need to do better. We need to find ways, what worked well, what hasn't worked, but we need to try and get more people involved in this consultation, especially when setting the budget. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Councillor Farr. And next we have Councillor Good, but before that I'll bring Caris in to address that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Farr, for the question. I mean, we use a range of different platforms really to get that message out as wide as we can. So certainly through social media and those kind of platforms, I would suggest we probably would access younger people. But also this year, we also pushed the consultation process out to schools. And a number of them use that as a way of pushing it to the pupils really and to the parents as well. So I know we had quite an influx actually of responses from people who'd heard about it from schools towards the end of the consultation process. So I think that's a learning curve for us as well. It was a way in which we could engage more broadly on some of those issues. And I think you're right about, I think the response rate is very good considering how long the survey was actually active, but we can always do better. And I think some of that comes back to the previous point about engaging with people about the council, what it provides, how it provides it and what it costs throughout the year really, so that it's current information for them. They understand what the council does. And I think that would probably also increase the response rate when we actually do the budget survey then at this time of year.
Thank you for that, Caris. Now I'll bring Councillor Good, please.
Thank you, Leader. I'm not sure whether potentially Councillor Farr read my mind, because I was going to ask about the youth survey, because I think it is a really positive thing. I think we do have to, a lot of these young people won't be council taxpayers yet, but many of them will actually be voters now, which is something we do have to consider, and we need to make sure that we are getting our young people engaged in civil life as early as we can. I think what would be really good to see, though, is perhaps a bit more of a breakdown between what young people are saying and what the general populace is saying, because I imagine, to John's point, actually, to Councillor Spandrick's point, I would imagine the younger generation will have more of a concern around decarbonisation, more of a concern around climate change. And I think it is important for us to reflect that, while I was the future once, I'm perhaps not the future anymore, and other people are. So I think it is important that we try and get those views and have those views as presented to us as both a cabinet and a CMB to properly understand the needs and what they feel they need from their borough going forward, because I think that's important as we look into the future. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you for that, Councillor Good. That's a very important point, because certainly when I visit schools with Councillor Bundle and colleagues, and when I meet with our youth council, they will, without exception, raise climate change and our response to that as a priority for them as young people. And of course, whilst we've made some efforts, lots of efforts actually to try and engage greater with younger people, there probably is a greater response in here from adults and older adults than from young people and younger adults. So that's something we will need to take on board as well. Next is the Deputy Leader, please.
Only very quickly, thank you, Leader. And that's a bit of clarity, because I'm aware that when we did, I can't remember what, was it our capital strategy? No, I can't even remember what it was. However, it was Alex Rawlin that presented it here. And one of the things that we were talking about was survey information. In here on page 15, it says aware visitors, informed visitors and engaged visitors, but there's no key. So that doesn't actually tell us what it is. I am assuming that engaged visitors are ones that filled in our survey. Informed visitors actually read all the documents to go with it, but I'm not quite sure what the aware is either. Thank you.
Caris, please.
That's exactly something I picked up when I read the report. So you are right. An engaged visitor is somebody who's actually engaged with the whole process and has submitted a response through to us. An informed visitor is somebody who has clicked on to the information and has read it and looked at some of the documents. And an aware visitor is somebody who may have made one trip to it and they're not taking it any further. But I think that is a very valid point, and we need to make sure that as standard, really, we put that kind of a key at the back of a report so that you can understand it when you read in the report then. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Caris, did you want to come back in?
No, that's much appreciated. It just clarifies my understanding, but I do think it's important that we put keys there. You know, we're a member, we're used to reading these reports. Anybody that's reading out there would not have any clue as to what it means. Thanks very much.
Thank you for that, Deputy Leader. I just wanted to reflect on the headline figures as they've been described in the cover report, and it is interesting and pleasing to see that there's a very high level of support from respondents to the budget principles that have guided this budget to this stage, that there was a majority in support of cost recovery, full cost recovery model for services, though there was a minority in opposition to that. There certainly was a very high level of support for review of assets and buildings, and also high level of support at 80% for remodelling services. So very broad support for key features of this budget. There was, however, concern expressed around the council tax increase, but also, and arguably this is a contradiction that we've all tried to grapple and wrestle with, in the section on reduce or close services, there was a very strong response that we should not cut services for children and young people, vulnerable adults, and funding for schools. Well, that's nearly 75% of our budget, isn't it? So the two are contradictory. There are also areas of the budget where we've seen the biggest growth in demand and the biggest cost pressures. So it does demonstrate how difficult it is to meet everyone's wishes and desires. Deputy Leader, did you want to come back in? It is a legacy hand, is it? Right, okay. The recommendation's been moved and seconded. Is everyone in agreement with that recommendation? And I'm sure, Caris, you will bring forward proposals on consultation and engagement for next year's budget as soon as you can. I should also say, I know it's referenced in the next report, but there were also some very helpful recommendations from Overrule and Scrutiny around the budget setting process, which of course encompasses the consultation and engagement with the public, and we'll certainly be looking to take on board those recommendations and make some changes to the process on the basis of that, and some of the proposals that have been made by Cabinet colleagues in this meeting. Thank you, colleagues. So we'll now receive the second report, the Chief Officer for Finance, Performance and Change, and that is on the medium-term financial strategy for 2024 to 2025 to 2027 to 2028. Caris, please.
Thank you, Leader. So the purpose of this report is to present to Cabinet the medium-term financial strategy for the period 2024-2025 through to 2027-28. This includes a financial forecast for that period, a detailed revenue budget for the coming financial year, and the capital programme for the period 2023 through to 2034. The Council's corporate plan is aligned to the medium-term financial strategy, with explicit links between the Council's wellbeing objectives and the resources directed to support them. The Council is developing a one-year corporate plan delivery plan for 2024-25, which will reflect the current financial situation whilst remaining ambitious in providing the maximum levels of service possible for all residents of the county borough within the funding available. The strategy outlines 13 key principles and detailed assumptions which drive the Council's budget and spending decisions. It outlines the financial context within which the Council is operating and tries to mitigate any financial risks and pressures going forward, whilst at the same time taking advantage of any opportunities that arise. The strategy focuses on how the Council intends to respond to the increasing pressures on public sector services. The pressures being experienced in this Council are reflected right across the public sector in Wales and beyond. Over the last 2 years, these pressures have been unprecedented and are impacting on all services across the local authority. The strategy details the approaches and principles the Council will follow to ensure it remains financially sustainable and delivers on the corporate wellbeing objectives. The quarterly reports to Cabinet on the projected revenue position for the current financial year have outlined in detail the impact on the budget of the significant pressures faced by the Council throughout this year. The Council has experienced an increase in demand for services, together with increased costs as a result of the worsening economic climate, rising inflation and interest rates. These have been reflected in rising prices, higher than anticipated pay awards, and significant tender price increases for goods and services. At the end of Q3, the projected overspend for the current financial year was £10.2 million. The projected overspend by services is estimated to be £15.2 million, and that's detailed for you in Table 2 of the strategy. This level of in-year financial pressure is unprecedented in Bridgend Council. Whilst some of these additional pressures are not recurrent, a number will become pressures for the Council going forward, and these are reflected in the medium-term financial strategy. The financial settlement for local government in Wales is not due to be announced until the end of February. Therefore, this budget is being proposed on the basis of the provisional settlement, which was received in December last year. Changes in the financial settlement, such as the transfer in of specific grants and possible additional funding, will be reported to Council in due course, but will not affect the Council tax level. In finalising this strategy and the budget for the coming year, estimates have been made which take into account circumstances and events which exist or are reasonably foreseeable at the time of preparing the budget. The budget has been prepared following consultation with elected members, the School Budget Forum, service managers and the public. Subject to the risks identified, the strategy provides a firm basis for managing the Council's resources for the coming financial year and beyond. If I may, Leader, I would take you to Annex 3, which is the detailed medium-term financial strategy, in order to draw members' attention to some of the key information within this document. Section 1 of the strategy includes a financial overview of the Council. Members will be aware that the Council has had to make budget reductions in previous years, and those budget reductions of £75.3 million have been found since 2010-2011. And these details can be found for you in Chart 1 of the medium-term financial strategy. These cuts have not been made equally across all service areas. However, in total, they do represent almost 21% of the Council's current net budget. The Council receives the majority of its revenue funding from Welsh Government through the Revenue Support Grant and a share of the non-domestic rates. This is supplemented through the Council tax collection, other grants and fees and charges. It's important to note that the Council tax currently only accounts for 27% of the net budget for this Council. In Section 2 of the strategy, further context is provided, which details both financial and non-financial information which has shaped the financial position for the Council. In real terms, Welsh Government funding has fallen year on year since 2012-2013, with an increasing element of the budget having to be funded by the council tax. Planning for the financial year 2024-2025 has been more challenging than usual due to the exceptional issues already referred to in the current financial year. Due to the pressures presenting themselves in 2023-2024, there are fewer opportunities to reduce services in a climate that requires more support for our older and more vulnerable members of society, and with a substantial increase in demand being experienced by many services. In addition, there are higher expectations on the Council to address homelessness more robustly and on a longer-term sustainable basis, and more pressure to strengthen and support social care, which is experiencing increased demand and costs, as well as more complex cases in both adults and children's services. As in previous years, further efforts have been made to secure greater involvement of stakeholders in the development of this strategy. And as already outlined, we have undertaken a 3-week consultation with residents of Bridgend, and the emphasis of this was to seek citizens' thoughts on how they could address the budget situation to enable the Council to review and also prioritise the budget. The outcome of this consultation process has been reported to Cabinet today, and details are contained in Table 5 of the Medium-Term Financial Strategy. Cabinet and Corporate Management Board have been working with the Budget Research and Evaluation Panel to facilitate the budget planning process during the year. The draft budget report approved by Cabinet in January this year has subsequently been very well scrutinised by the Council Scrutiny Committees, resulting in a report to Cabinet on the 6th of February from the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which outlined a number of recommendations. Cabinet has considered these, which include recommendations from the Budget Research and Evaluation Panel, and a response to these is provided in Appendix A to the Medium-Term Financial Strategy. The responses received from the public consultation and from discussions with and recommendations from the Budget Research and Evaluation Panel and Scrutiny Committees have been considered, and the proposed budget is based on the comments and responses received. Following the consultation process, a number of changes have been made to the draft budget. So details of the proposed budgets for individual services are given in Section 2.4 of the strategy. In Section 3 of the Medium-Term Financial Strategy, the current financial situation is outlined for members. With regards to the provisional local government settlement, the headline figure was an overall increase of 3.1% across Wales. The spread of the increase across Wales ranged from 2% to 4.7%, and for Bridgend, there was an increase of 3% for the coming financial year. This was the 10th highest increase across all Welsh authorities, and that's illustrated for you in Chart 3 within the strategy. It is important to note that this increase is below the current rate of inflation. The strategy also models the financial position for the authority for the next 4 years, based on the latest information available from Welsh Government. Welsh Government has not given an indication of the possible settlement figures for the period after 24-25. However, all indications are that these settlements are likely to be very challenging for local authorities, with a possible 0% change to our funding from Welsh Government. The financial forecast for 25-2028 is predicated on assumptions regarding demographic projections, inflationary uplift, the impact of new legislation and policies, and increased staffing costs. In developing these estimates, the strategy contains assumptions with regards to possible council tax increases going forward. Due to the pressures already outlined, it is proposed to increase council tax by 9.5% in 2024-2025. If council tax did not increase, the council would need to make further budget reductions of around £9.6 million to balance the budget, in addition to the £13 million already proposed. For planning purposes, it's been assumed that the council tax will increase by 4.5% in each year from 2025-2026 through to 2027-2028. I would stress that these figures are for planning purposes only and will be reviewed every time the strategy is updated. Together with the indicative funding from Welsh Government, it's therefore estimated that there will be a net budget requirement of £44.8 million to be met over the period of the strategy. And these scenarios are detailed for you at table 7 within the strategy. The Council's corporate risk assessment identifies key corporate risks and mitigating actions, and it is included within your papers. This was updated in January, and the level of overall risk for the authority was increased, which reflects the current service and financial demands that the Council is having to address. The revised corporate risk assessment was considered by the Governance and Audit Committee in January, and these risks have been taken into account in the preparation of this strategy. Section 4 of the strategy outlines in more detail the budget position for the coming financial year. The net budget requirement for next year is detailed at table 9 of that report, and it shows a net budget of £359.7 million. The proposed allocation of this table is detailed for members at table 10 within the strategy. When the draft budget was presented in January this year, there was uncertainty regarding whether the additional teachers' pension costs would be funded in the settlement. Therefore, this money was retained centrally until clarification was received. The Minister has now confirmed that she has written to the Chief Secretary of the Treasury to confirm the Welsh Government expectation that this cost will be met by Westminster as it has been in the past. This, together with the additional funding received via the Welsh Government draft settlement, totals £4 million. And this funding has now been released to support the budget that you have today. In summary, the key points to note include that financial pressures of over £30.5 million are funded for the coming year, which include £11.8 million to meet pay and price inflation, and then £11.8 million of inescapable service cost pressures, which include costs associated with supporting and protecting our most vulnerable residents, especially children, support for children with additional learning needs, funding to meet contractual price increases, especially home to school transport, increased costs of commissioned services in the social care sector following the increase in the real living wage, and an increase in the Fire and Rescue Authority's levy on the Council to meet their own pay and price increases. Inevitably, additional pressures will arise during the year as a result of new legislative changes or unanticipated events. A provisional allocation of £550,000 has therefore been set aside for these whilst further work is undertaken. Funding will be allocated in year subject to business case approval where necessary. Concern was expressed by all scrutiny committees that the planned level of savings for the year, and these savings stood at 16 million at draft budget stage, may not be achieved in full during that financial year, resulting in possible overspends against budget. In order to mitigate against this, a provision of £1 million has been set aside as a contingency against non-delivery of budget reduction proposals. Members can find details regarding the cost pressures at Appendix C of this afternoon's report. In order to balance the budget next year, reductions have been identified which total £13 million. These have been reviewed since the proposals were considered by Cabinet and Scrutiny Committees in January, with the savings required to be met having been reduced by £2.99 million. The main changes are with regards to the savings to be made to the school's delegated budget, which has been reduced from 5% to 3%. And also reduced savings to be made from social services and wellbeing, communities and the Chief Exec's budgets. These particular savings are shown for you in Table 12 of the report, and the detail of all the proposed savings are shown in Appendix D. Members will be aware that South Wales Fire and Rescue Authority is funded by raising a levy on its constituent councils, which is based on population. Within the strategy, reference is made to this at paragraph 4.1.21. The levy payable for the coming financial year is £9 million, which is an increase of £120,000 or 5.23% above the current figure for this year. The Council does raise income via fees and charges, and these are reviewed on an annual basis. New charges or charges that have been included in the 2024-2025 budget and are above the general increase are shown in Appendix E. As well as the revenue budget, this strategy also deals with the proposed capital programme for the 10-year period up to 2033-2034. This programme has been revised during this financial year to bring it up to date and to take into account new capital schemes as they have been identified. Within the Welsh Government provisional settlement for the coming financial year, £7.98 million is being made available to support capital expenditure. Due to the limited capital finances available, services have not been asked to submit bids for funding at this stage. In addition to limited funding levels, there are significant pressures within the current capital programme overall, which have been reported to members throughout this year and include the increased price of materials as a result of higher inflation rates, sometimes up to 25% higher than previously estimated. Supply chain difficulties leading to higher prices and delays in schemes being completed, and the inability to recruit to key posts both within the council but also within the companies we contract with, resulting in higher wages and overall contract costs. The capital programme contains a number of annual allocations which total £5.2 million that are met from the total general capital funding for the council. The proposed allocation for these for the coming year is shown in table 13 of the strategy. Within today's report, one change is proposed to the current capital programme, which is the drawdown inclusion of £600,000 of Section 106 monies to be used for affordable housing. Any further new proposals for capital funding will be considered in light of and in line with the proposed capital strategy for the period and will be brought back to Council for approval at a later date. The revised capital programme is outlined for you at Appendix G. An overview of the Council's reserves has been undertaken in January this year in accordance with our Reserves and Balances Protocol, and members will find a breakdown of the movement on the reserves at that time at Appendix H of today's report. It is anticipated that there will be drawdown of a number of reserves during the final 2 months of this financial year. Included an estimated drawdown of £12.8 million from the Capital Programme Reserve, which does rely on additional capital spend being incurred during the final few months of the year. It also includes an estimated drawdown of £3.5 million for the school's capital maintenance grant, expenditure towards maintenance services within schools, £2.4 million for the Universal Primary Free School Meals funding towards the kitchen refurbishments, and also some money to support the Coastal Risk Management Programme. It's also anticipated that we will draw down £5.5 million from Directorate earmarked reserves and a further £1.9 million from the Equalisation and Grant earmarked reserves. In addition, any year-end overspend for this current financial year will need to be funded from earmarked reserves or from the Council Fund. The current projection as at Q3 is already outlined is that this could be as high as £10.2 million. And this will significantly reduce the level of reserves available going forward into the next financial year. In line with the reserves protocol, a further review will be undertaken at the end of the current financial year, and transfers will be made at that point, taking account of the overall financial position for the council, including the final outturn, actual council tax collected, earmarked reserve levels, the council fund level, and any new pressures or risks that need to be provided for. With regards to the council tax, the proposed budget of £359.725 million, shown in Table 10 of the strategy, can be balanced with an increase in the council tax of 9.5% for 2024-2025. This increase is higher than the rate of inflation, but is required to enable the council to meet the significant and unprecedented budget pressures that it is facing, including higher than anticipated pay, price, and also significant pressures on services. The final section of the strategy provides information on the council's longer-term financial outlook. This is not intended to be a 10-year budget strategy due to the number of variables that impact on our financial position. However, it does provide financial framework to reference against when preparing both annual and longer-term financial plans. So, Leader, if I may, I would now refer you to the recommendations in section 9 of the covering report, which are that Cabinet is asked to approve the medium-term financial strategy for the coming 3 years, including the revenue budget for next year and the 10-year capital programme. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you for that report, Caris, and I take the opportunity to thank you and all the officers in the finance team, and indeed all members of the Corporate Management Board for their effort to reach this stage, because of course these are recommendations made by you as our statutory officers, recommendations that we have before us today as members, of course based on work with Cabinet, but we have before us today recommendations from you as our statutory officers. I will bring Councillor Williams first, please.
Thank you, Leader. And can I also echo those thanks to Caris and the team, the support that you've offered us as Cabinet members, the support that you've offered to the Budget Research and Evaluation Panel, and to the wider scrutiny process. It's been quite a slog getting to where we are today, but you know, in very difficult circumstances, I think we've got a report that we can certainly be quite pleased with. I think when we presented the draft report after we received the settlement, it was very clear that there was an element of headroom in that report. Because of the how we were going to regard the teachers' pension element, we were taking that Welsh Government would pass that on to us in the year, and also we had a slightly better settlement than we were predicting, and therefore I think it was no surprise to anyone that we did have headroom of around about £4 million. And then we presented that to the Budget Research and Evaluation Panel and to scrutiny for their consideration on how we move forward. I attended all the scrutiny sessions, and I listened very intently, and I took notes, and I believe that the changes that we've made to the budget before us this afternoon certainly recognise the concerns raised at those scrutiny meetings. We've also had the public consultation, and I think also the budget that we have before us reflects the outcome from that budget consultation. Also, I attended the School Budget Forum, which also is a very important consultee on the budget setting process, and I totally understand the concerns raised by the teachers, but I think there's a certain willingness there for the teachers and schools to work with the authority through what is a very challenging time financially, and I certainly got that feeling that they were very much on board with us. They recognised the challenge that the authority were facing, and I think that the fact that we've been able to reduce that's quite severe impact on schools from 5% down to 3%. I hope that the schools will recognise that contribution, and I hope that they will work with us to overcome the financial challenges that they will face going forward. I'm sure, but I think it's quite important to say there that even though there is a reduction in their delegated budget, there will be significant support to the teachers through the uplift in their pay and the pension contribution, also assistance towards energy costs for schools, and therefore the net result will mean a further uplift in school delegated budget spending by the end of this year. Also, through the scrutiny process, primarily, there were certainly concerns raised around one or two of the budget reductions that we had presented. Now, I think there was an appetite that all budget reductions were presented to a scrutiny. I think previously we might have sort of been criticised for for cleansing that budget reduction report. So this year, given the financial situation we're in, all budget reductions were presented to the Budget Research and Evaluation Panel and to the scrutiny process, and they had an opportunity to comment on all of those. And I think that the reductions and the alterations that we've made in that budget reductions certainly reflect what I took away from the scrutiny process. Now, there was a concern that we needed to maintain our support for children with additional needs. There was concern that we needed to support hospital discharges. There was concern over the appearance of the county borough. There's one that probably missed the scrutiny process, and that was the Legionella operated. Now that has a statutory risk there, and we've had to consider that, and you know, we've judged that maybe that should have gone back in. We certainly listened to the scrutiny and their concerns around the back office support for legal and for procurement, and so we've tried to address that as best we can. You know, we've had a very difficult job in balancing the risk to the authority and the impact on the council taxpayer, and we recognise that. And all the way along, we've been trying to minimise that impact on the council taxpayer and also minimising the risk to the authority. The risk and the end-of-year pressures that we're facing is probably the greatest risk that this authority has felt. And Carys has said it's unprecedented. I don't think we've, in the history of Bridgend County Borough Council, I don't think we've actually presented an overspend position. Not that I can remember. And that underspend in previous year has showed up our capital programme. It's the reason why we've got a relatively healthy balanced position. But that is going to come under threat this year, because as Carys have said, the overspend will have to be funded from those previous years' underspends. And so we're going to be in a completely different situation this year. And so it's quite right that we retain £1 million of that headroom for a central contingency, because we're not sure what risks lie ahead of us. We know that the settlement next year is going to be very, very challenging indeed. And so going forward, we welcome the additional support that's come down from the Westminster government. I'll give praise where praise is due, and there will be a small uplift there, and that will come through now as extra support for the social care and the education. I know the scrutiny process were asked us to look again at the pressures, and ordinarily the pressures would be called inescapable pressures, and I don't think that's an unfair description. They are genuine, inescapable pressures. When you go through that pressures list, they are real pressures on today's budget. They are overspends on today's budget. And it wouldn't be, if we're going to start this year going forward, then we have to have a robust budget that we can defend and we can work with. There's no point having a budget that adds up if it doesn't work. So those pressures there, and they're there in Appendix A for all to see. But the 2.2 million of pressure for education, the home to school transport is overspending. It's something that we will have a look at a closer look at this year. But that is a real pressure and it needs to be addressed. The 8.3 million pressures for social care, we've just been told that the directorates are overspending by 15 million. So that pressure is there and that needs to be met. So I don't think there's much room to manoeuvre on the pressures. On the reductions or the cuts, we've got £13 million worth of cuts there. And as I said, there's an element of risk around our strategic need to safeguard the authority, and the risk that we have assessed then is deliverable within those cuts, and therefore the minimum council tax that we can apply this year is that 9.5%. I think to reduce the council tax further would just add unjustifiable risk to the budget. It won't. It'll add too much pressure to deliver a balanced budget by the end of this year. And so for those reasons, I think I've covered everything off there, Leader. I'm happy to support the report and move the recommendation.
Thank you for that, Councillor Williams. I will bring in next Councillor Good, please.
Thank you, Leader. I think it worked. Oh, Councillor Williams, your mic is on. I think you were saying.
There is one, because that was...
Taking advantage now, Councillor Williams.
Yeah, but it was the bus station. I think it deserves a mention because it wasn't actually in as a reduction this year. But the bus station was there because it's not a statutory service. And we have to recognise that. It's not a statutory service, but we recognise that it is a valuable service. And that is why it's there. So I was delighted when Councillor Stephen Bledsoe came forward in the scrutiny process to offer some assistance with increasing the potential revenue for the bus station, and I'm sure we'll work with interest with the town council members to see what can be done so we can maintain the bus station presence in Bridgend. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Williams. I will now bring in Councillor Good, please.
Only if Councillor Williams is sure he's finished. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, I was just going to note, really, and I'm happy to support the recommendations and second the report. I think I just want to bring a bit of attention to the fact I believe Caris noted in her remarks that, of course, we are looking at increasing council tax by 9.5% this year, which is above inflation. But I think what we need to highlight here is we, as an authority, have taken a decision for many years trying to prevent the public from facing the brunt of reductions that we've had to face as a council. And I think it should be noted that, of course, last year we increased council tax by below inflation, when inflation was very high, and the year before that, council tax was frozen. So, you know, I think for all the public out there watching this or seeing reports about this, I think it is important to know that we have got to that point where simply it is not possible any longer for us to do that, sadly, and that is the reality of council financing in this current period of time. And we do have to take that into consideration, and we now have, as already been noted by Councillor Williams, seen over £30 million worth of cuts, and that is just to get to a balanced budget of 9.5% increase and 30 million in cuts. So, I just wanted to reflect on that. The one question I have for Caris, and I do think it's very prudent to put in place a contingency fund of 1 million. We know that there are challenging savings within this budget, but I just wanted to check with Caris on what process will be put in place to make sure that this contingency fund is only used as the last resort, and then what support will be given to officers to try and ensure that if they feel like they aren't potentially meeting those reductions, they are given support to help find a way of doing it. Because I think it is really important that we try wherever possible not to touch that contingency fund unless we absolutely have to. But I think that's it for me from the leader. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Good. Caris, do you want to respond to that from Councillor Good, please? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question, Councillor Good. I mean, the £1 million contingency has been put in there, acknowledging the issues raised, I think, in every scrutiny committee with regards to deliverability. And so it's been put there. I can reassure you, we will be monitoring the budget much more tightly in the coming year, just because of the pressures that all services are facing. As a result, we will pick up any variances earlier than maybe we would have done, because currently we report into you quarterly. We will so one remediating action we will be taking is to monitoring much more regularly. As soon as the variance then becomes apparent, there will be obviously discussions between the service and finance to look at why that's happened and what mitigating action can be taken during the year to pull that back. So it will very much be a last resort going into that contingency. but we will need, obviously, to safeguard the budget as we go forward. The council has had money in reserves previously for these contingencies, and to be fair, have not regularly pulled down on them. So we are experienced in making sure that any money that comes from that contingency will be well vetted, and it will come through into Cabinet for approval as well as part of our normal budget monitoring processes.
Thank you for that, Carys, and thank you for flagging that, Councillor Good. I think it's an important risk that we have identified, that overall scrutiny, the cross-party overall scrutiny committees recognised, and they made it one of their recommendations, and I'm pleased that we're accepting that recommendation and making that provision. I think it's right to have that greater provision within this year's budget because of the scale of budget reductions that it is proposed to make. Over £13 million of budget reductions means that simply there is a greater risk because of the greater scale of budget reductions, and therefore we need greater contingency in the budget to reflect that. Next, we have the Deputy Leader, please.
Thank you very much, Leader. Thank you very much, Carys. That's really helpful. I think when we're talking about budget, we need to be very clear that when we're setting this budget, there's an unprecedented demand on this council, the like that we have never, ever seen before. So whether that's in education, social services, or any of the over 800 services that we provide, and I did pay particular attention to what our residents told us in the responses to BCB budget survey, but I'm Chair of Governors as well. So, you know, I'm LEA appointed, but I'm fully aware of the implications that 5% cut that we had suggested go forward. I was fully aware of the implications that would have on us as a school. But the public told us that they prioritised our children and young people cohort. They told us that they were prioritising funding for schools. They also told us that they wanted to pay particular attention to children with additional learning needs as well. And if we do that, then we are unable to cut our council tax below the 9.5%. And I think that's what we need to be really clear at. I think what we, you know, I know that Councillor Williams has already referenced the funding for our schools, but a 3% cut with the cash increase to cover their pension costs and with the additional allowances to cover their energy and support their energy costs as well, because we all know that they've gone through the roof. At least they're in a flat cash position, so I'm really very comfortable with that. But there's an increase in need for children and young people, and the demand is really evident. And when you look at the distribution of our population, you know, we're just talking about children here, but our adults, we know that we need to plan for the future. And our care and support increase. I am in that highest bracket of the aged population, or age distribution of population is what I want to say. I am aged between 45 and 68, and in 10 years' time, I need to ensure that there's a care service that's suitable for my nan, my mum, or me, as the case may be. So we do need to plan for future demand. And I think I'd also like to take members to page 18 of the document as well, the MTFS document itself. 2.43, social care and wellbeing. We know that we want less dependency on council services. It's a topic that's well rehearsed within the council chambers. However, what I would draw members' attention to is social services was previously highly dependent on short-term grants. So we weren't in an overspend position at the end of each year because we had grants that would cover our overspend positions. We're not getting those grants anymore. So we need to ensure that we are planning for the future. And when we're looking at our base budget, social services is well referenced. But I also want to be clear that we have listened to all of scrutiny recommendations. But I want to ask if scrutiny costed those recommendations. What has been very evident is that we should we have implemented all of scrutiny proposals, then we would have needed to make additional cuts elsewhere. One of the council's wellbeing objectives, and the majority of our residents who responded to our survey, 81%, agreed with us, is to prioritise and support our vulnerable people and helping to make them more self-sustainable. So we do want to have an impact on our residents, and we want them to be less reliable on us. But we are burning through our reserves. Our reserves covered our overspend in social services last year. We need to be cognizant of that. We are already indicating that there is a risk to our social services budget this year, and that is purely due to demand on services. When the settlement was announced, it put every council in Wales in a very difficult position. It's exceptionally challenging to deliver our critical services against the backdrop of austerity. And that austerity now has been 14 years. Now, it doesn't matter what your political persuasion is. In the UK, it doesn't matter what colour your flag is on your members. All councils across the UK are saying 14 years of austerity is now enough. And we need to be clear with people out there. This is not the responsibility of officers or members in this chamber that have gone before. This is as a result of reducing budgets. And I also think there's another point we need to make note of, and that is, how are we going to deliver services in the future, bearing in mind that we know we are going to have further budgetary pressures going forward. So yes, our budget is a risk. I think it's a risk that we need to take. We are protecting those that are vulnerable in our society. Thanks very much, Leader.
Thank you for that contribution, Deputy Leader, and it's an important contribution because it does recognise that our social services and wellbeing budget will increase from 98 million to over 108 billion under these proposals, and that has to be funded, doesn't it? That has to be funded, and it has to be funded through the council tax increase, because we have not had adequate additional funding from Welsh Government, and I have not heard a single member say that we should not increase the budget for social services by that amount. There has been support across the chamber that we increase investment in social services by over 10 million. And we'll also see an increase in the education budget as well, from over 29 million to 31 million. And we will also see an increase in the budget for schools from 114 to 118 million. And that comes at a cost. That has to be funded. And the proposal today is how we can fund that. We cannot fund that by budget reductions alone. Unfortunately, we have to bring this forward, this proposal to increase the council tax. Next, we have Councillor Spanzik, please.
Thank you, Leader. And I've never been a fan of this process over the years, trying to represent and argue the case on behalf of the Communities Directorate. There's always been cuts across all directorates, and it's been disproportionate on occasions, but I accept the fact we have to operate as a corporate body and look across the whole spectrum of services we're providing, and it's quite clear the protection of the vulnerable is there at the top. But we are where we are today, and we have listened. There's some valid comments coming from scrutiny from the public and from our own sort of. I've lost track of how many meetings for the month, and numerous meetings, and we did start off, as Councillor Williams said, with a complete sheet of cuts, and nothing was taken out. Albeit we're now at the position where we're able to come back on some of them, but we've started off with everything on the table, whether they're palatable or not. And one of them has been touched on already, the Gem bus station, and that perhaps shouldn't have been there in the beginning, because it was put there as part and parcel of everything on the table. But we need, and we taking it out now, and it won't be back on there until we have a serious, full-blown proposal for an alternative, what that can be, and what we do with the land that's there. So it will not be there. It wasn't there this year, anyway, unfortunately, contrary to the misinformation that's been peddled out there, perhaps by, in some sources, that it was not down for closing this year anyway, from 24-25, and it's not there anymore. It's been removed, and that's us listening to the public and debating ourselves, not just listening to one small group of people. That's a wider debate we've taken on board. I touched earlier on decarbonisation, and we're fortunate COM13, the climate emergency response. We're now going to reduce the cuts there. It's still a small cut, but there's £200,000 going back to that budget to be used in the future for this year to try and draw down other money, to attract other money to grants, and to keep that work ongoing. But we have not got enough money to hit net zero 2030. It's decarbonisation, and we have to work at that with the plan we have and the strategy in place. And hopefully the public will be on board with that. And as I said earlier, there's a lot more work we need to do to work with the public and explain that. COM20, I'm glad that through scrutiny, street cleansing, that's been removed. I'm waiting for the day whether I'll still be here to see street cleansing increased in numbers, because it's been reduced by over 50%. But at least we're not cutting anymore, and we cannot cut. We need to value it. There's lots of services, but visible services out there. Try and keep our streets as clean, as tidy, as clean as possible, even after cutting the resource of over 50% of years. Shop mobility, COM9. I accept the fact that scrutiny would like to see it reinstated. Times have changed when shop mobility was first introduced years ago. There's a lot more people now with their own mobility scooters and have access to that. So shop mobility is not something, it's not a statutory service, it's not something we're reintroducing, but it is there as an option, as it says in the report, that Bridgend Town Council could consider taking board. I believe they have definitely the largest precept in Bridgend County Borough as a town council, and probably the largest in Wales, probably double some of the, if not treble some of the ones in this county borough. So Bridgend Town Council, if you value shop mobility, the option's there for you to take it on board. Quite simple. It's not all down to this authority. So then some items on there for income generation. Street works permits been touched on, and maybe there is some work there we need to do, look at benchmarking, but that's again not going to solve our financial crisis. But we do need to cover the costs, and that's been covered in a previous scrutiny where we're only allowed to cover the costs, not make a profit on it. So I think scrutiny need to be clear on what we can and cannot do there. The same with full cost recovery on bulky waste. We are increasing the costs, but there's a level at which we go beyond, and we'll perhaps encourage more flight tipping because people will not then take up the bulky waste service. So we are increasing to what's a reasonable level that we think it is, and hopefully people will still use that service, and we'll keep that working in the future. The last two, Leader, I'd like to point out is COM25, the Community Recycling Centre. Another one following scrutiny recommendations. We're removing that. We are already doing the one-day closure that started per week. This proposal has been taken out, partly because it wouldn't have been practical this year to consider putting the second day before we even assess the impact of the first day closing. But we need to look at the wider picture, and I'll suggest with scrutiny again that look at possible reduced hours and even a booking system which has proven to work in other authorities, and that may well solve some problems. There'll be a cost for that, a system to implement it, but it may well reduce the queues where people get a bit upset if they're queuing for an hour or more. I've been there myself and done it, and maybe a booking system which works now could be looked at, and that's work that's ongoing. The last one, Leader, COM10, it is identified as Porthcawl Marina, but reviewing the fees to look at full cost recovery, and again, that's something we need to do, because we don't subsidise people having their static caravans to trek away, and as far as I'm aware, Porthcawl Marina is a leisure type marina, it's leisure facilities, it's leisure boats, so people need to pay the full costs, or the full appropriate cost to berth their boats at Porthcawl Marina. And I'll leave it at that now, Leader, but welcome the report. I welcome the report, except this is a balanced way forward, balanced budget, and hopefully scrutiny will be in a better place next year, communities will be in a better place next year, not to have further cuts.
Thank you for that, Councillor Spanzik, and you're right again to identify recommendations that have been made by the cross-party overview and scrutiny committee, and the proposal today is that we accept a number of those recommendations in that spirit of one council, because we think that they're the right recommendations to have been made. I can see that the head of Operations for the Communities Directorate would like to come in. So I'll bring Zach in, please.
Thank you, Leader. No, it was just to add to one of the points that Councillor Spanswick made, which was you referenced the suggestion around a streetworks permitting scheme. And I think from scrutiny recollection, there was discussion around Carmarthenshire and something they may have had in place. I've had some of our officers just checking into that, and as it happens, had a response come through at lunchtime today. And just for a little bit of clarity, they haven't got a streetworks permitting scheme as of yet. There aren't any in Wales. What they have got, and we do the same thing, is where streetworks inspectors identify problems above a certain threshold percentage, they can create improvement plans with statutory undertakers. And those improvement plans require extra monitoring on behalf of the local authority, and they can recover that cost. And that's what's been happening in Carmarthen. It doesn't benefit the financial position of the authority at all. It just deals with a problem and rectifying that problem with the statutory undertakers. So I just wanted to make that point of clarity, because it isn't something that would benefit our budget, albeit if you had a problem with your statutory undertakers, it would address an issue on the ground.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. And again, welcome the fact that there have been a small number of proposals from Overview and Scrutiny to raise income, and that was identified as one potential source of income. And as you've had the microphone, I'd ask you, take the opportunity to ask you about the other proposal, I believe, that was identified in the Communities Directorate, and that is a proposal from Overview and Scrutiny to potentially move to a greater cost recovery, or indeed full cost recovery, on bulky waste collection. So I wanted to ask about that and the potential income generation from that, and whether that would make a significant difference or not. Please, Zach.
Thank you, Leader. So yeah, there is, as members will be aware, there is a proposal that presuming everything is accepted, will increase the charges for bulky waste collections. So the charges there are going up. And they've been staged, because this isn't the first time they've gone up. Originally, members may recall a number of years ago, bulky waste collections used to be free, and charges were introduced at a point in time. And over the years, when there have been budgetary pressures, we have increased. The issue is suddenly jumping to full cost recovery is, quite frankly, would it backfire, as in the number of people using the system may well drop off to the point where actually you don't recover hardly anything, because you don't have to do it. And that would be the risk if we put it up. And let's face it, as you point out, in the grand scheme of our budgetary scale, it would be a fairly minor sort of increase in overall significance. But we will continue to look at future year increases, but I think there is a risk of doing too much too soon, because you will reach a point where the appetite to pay for those collections won't be there. You're more inclined to just take those materials with a friend or family member in a car to the CRC site, that sort of activity. There's a point where you just won't use the service anymore.
Thank you for that response, Zach. Next, we have Councillor Farr, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, really, we spent lots of months going through this budget and looking at the way we deliver services, and we've talked a lot about changing the way we deliver. I think the emphasis must be on preventive work, so I was really pleased to see that we did take on board the scrutiny's recommendation. We've removed the support for children with extra need, and also we've removed the third sector hospital discharge, because if we had, I think we hadn't done that, that would have increased the work on adult care. So I'm really, really pleased to see that. The bus station, just for everybody to know, is that for the past couple of months, I have been working with the employability team to look at how we can generate income. So that work in the background has been going on, and will continue to do that. Question I wanted to ask carers, the scrutiny committee, we met for hours and hours and hours, and they made lots of recommendations. So I'm just wondering, if we did accept all the recommendation, would we still be able to deliver a balanced budget? Because at the end of the day, our legal responsibility is to deliver a balanced budget. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Carys, please.
I think my initial response to that, Councillor Farr, was actually many of the suggestions and recommendations that came up through all of the scrutiny committees have actually been addressed in the papers that you've got in front of you. There are a few which some of your cabinet colleagues have already outlined have not been taken forward. The only way in which we could have funded all of those was to increase the council tax further. No suggestions came forward from scrutiny committees with regards to further savings that could be made to compensate for those. Therefore, the only option we would have been in here today to balance that budget was either to look for savings elsewhere or to increase the council tax in order to balance today.
Thank you for that, Carys.
Thank you very much, Leader, because I am interjecting and this isn't the contribution I wish to make at this point. However, I would ask what our council tax percentage rise would have been had we implemented all of scrutiny recommendations, please.
Thank you for that question. I don't know if you've got the answer to that one, Carys, but the question's been asked, so over to you, please.
I think the main one was another percentage cut with regards to schools, which is another 1.1 million, and a 1% increase on our council tax only raises 920,000. Therefore, just to fund that one would have been another increase on the council tax of over 1%.
So,
Deputy Leader, please. Do you want to come back in?
Only because this is a question that we will be asked at full council next week. Can we make sure that we have that information available to us? Because I would like to know, if we had implemented all of those scrutiny recommendations, what the council tax rise would have been to our residents, appreciating that we haven't reduced it as part of our budget consultations, but appreciating the difficulties and the challenges that we find ourselves in. Thank you very much, Carys.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Carys.
Yes, certainly we can have that information ready for council next week.
And we know that the O'Verne Scrutiny Committee members and the chair, particularly of the Corporate O'Verne Scrutiny Committee, Councillor Alex Williams, and indeed Councillor Bletson and Councillor Paul Davis, recognise how difficult it is to balance these competing pressures and demands, and that for every reduction that is removed, then that's further pressure on the council tax increase, and for every percentage of reduction in the proposed council tax increase is further reductions on services, isn't it? That is the basic difficulty and dilemma that we all face as members. Councillor Blundell is next, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And a lot of cabinet members have already mentioned some of the things I'm going to mention, but there's a few others. First of all, obviously thank the scrutiny members and the committees for listening to us and obviously giving us their thoughts as well. The bus station is a key one, as an avid bus user myself, especially at early hours and late hours of the evening, and getting caught in the rain. I'm glad that's... I don't know if I have to declare an interest in using the bus there, Kelly. But no, it's good to see that that's going to remain open, even though, as Councillor Spanswick says, it wasn't in the budget for this year. One of the recommendations that they brought forward, obviously, is to move forward and at pace the merger of schools and obviously that's the closure of some schools as well. Obviously, I'm going to ask Lindsay here if he could outline some of the statutory stuff around that and why we can't do that, but it's important to note that these things take time and they will include consultation. I know one of the schools already has been in touch because they think it's a done deal, and it most certainly is not. It's a recommendation at this point, and it's something that we're looking to do. It might not even work out because we have to go around all the budgetary things around it, such as maybe you have to build a new school, maybe you have to transport children to another site. These all things cost money, and as we all know, we're running out. We've got less of it, and things cost a heck of a lot more. So my first question, really, before I move on, is can Lindsay outline the procedures around that and why we can't bring that forward at this time? Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Blundell. Lindsay, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Leader. For the purpose of recording, I'm Lindsay Harvey, Corporate Director, Education and Family Support. Thanks, Councillor Blundell. Yeah, happy to do that. With all major policy change, they would require significant statutory consultations and involve significant public consultation with all affected stakeholders, and a number of impact assessments would need to be undertaken before any of this would be taken forward. So much as we're keen to obviously look at budget reductions wherever possible, we would be very cautious in going forward with this, and it would be subject to everything we hear, as we've heard previously today, from the public and especially the stakeholders involved in those schools.
Thank you for that explanation, Lindsay. Back to you then, Councillor Blundell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, again, and thank you, Lindsay, for that, because I think it's important that these things we can't just do on the whim. There are statutory obligations that we have to go through first, quite rightly as well, because these are such massive decisions that will be taken. On the school budgets themselves, I just want to make a point. I know the head teachers mentioned that they would have preferred a cut to spread out over the 4 years, and they would have liked to come down to 2 and then 2 in those following years. Now, we did look at this and we took this looked at this with great vigour, and we worked out what we have available as headroom and what we have to also, with our obligations for keeping the bus station open, recycling centres, and also any contingency fund that we might need, because as we've seen from the budget this year, we may need contingency going forward. And obviously the decision making to come down to 3 instead of going to 2, which head teachers asked for, but also there is instead of in 1 year, there's only a 1% cut instead of a 2% cut as previous. So overall, it is the same level of cut. It is just spread out differently to what head teachers may have already asked for in those meetings, and as the school budget forum has asked. I don't know if it's just me. There are some strange noises. So I'm going to finish my point.
Councillor Jenkins, could you mute yourself, please? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. I thought I was hearing things then for a minute. But no, that's really my point. It's just to explain that what we've gone through is that unfortunately we can't go down to the full 2% as head teachers asked for. We've gone down to 3, and obviously in subsequent years there'll be 1 year where it's percent. Now obviously in future years those cuts may not be there. We may be in a different position. You know, the change of government, one hopes, and then we may be in a different position financially to make a different decision ahead of those years. So it's just really to go through those bits there to outline the importance of that. Yes, we have to look at this in a singular year, but also multifaceted going forward as well. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Councillor Blundell. And of course, we know that local authorities across Wales have had to make equally difficult decisions around funding for schools, and some local authorities have made even more difficult decisions in terms of the additional funding that they've provided to schools, and some local authorities are not providing additional funding to schools at all, and that demonstrates the extreme pressures that all local authorities in Wales are under currently. Deputy Leader is next, please.
Thank you very much, Leader. I think it's just a point that we need to make clear. This is a public meeting, and I'm aware of lots of discourse around the budget setting process here in the council. What I would say is this process is laid down by constitutional arrangements, and should any of our members be unhappy with this process, they are more than capable, and we would welcome any amendments to our constitutional arrangements at Council AGM. And I'm also aware that this all goes through our Democratic Services Committee. It's a cross-party committee, so should anybody have any concerns, they can raise them in that format, and any report can come to Council. but I can see you can't bring it to council. See, I'm looking at the legal officer as I'm saying this.
I will bring in our constitutional expert here and ask.
Just to clarify, the process for amending the Constitution, there isn't a report taken to the AGM to amend the Constitution, and it isn't within the remit of the Democratic Services Committee to review it. The process is set out in the Constitution. I think I did email some members last week to explain that, or if not, it's in my outbox waiting to go. Proposed amendments come to myself, I review them, and then I report that back annually to see whether members are interested in doing a full review, whether they just want a desktop review, or whether they just want to leave it for another 12 months. So I will be bringing that paper to the AGM to wrap up everything that's been suggested to me this year so far.
Yeah, I'll bring you back in.
So can I clarify something? Because my understanding was any amendments to the Constitution needed to be done at the AGM. They don't. So how are any amendments made then? Because what is the process? Because if we're saying that as members we are responsible for this process, how do we amend it?
So suggestions are sent to myself. I then bring that all together in one report, and I take that either to the AGM or we discuss it at group leaders. I think we discussed it at group leaders last month. And then council then decide whether they want to do that full review, whether they're happy, or whether they want to delegate it to Democratic Services. Once we've done all that work, if you recall on the last occasion we had a working group, we did quite a lot of research. They then take a report back to full council, and full council decides on any amendments they think appropriate.
Thank you for that, Monitoring Officer and Deputy Leader. And I think it's... You want to come back in?
Because I think it's worth having this debate in public, because we need to understand, all members need to understand how we make changes. Because I'm very aware of all the emails and correspondence that I am copied into about the discourse, the disappointment, the disgruntledness around processes, because currently they have to submit by Thursday. I don't know what time, but I know they have to submit any alternatives by Thursday, which then doesn't get scrutinised. So like our budget has been scrutinised for so many months, why is it that any amendments wouldn't be? Because I appreciate that Caris would have to sign them off, but there is something around that. Actually, there is no scrutiny of any other budget in that format.
Thank you for that, Deputy Leader. Monitoring Officer, please.
Yeah, so any alternative budget needs to be submitted by 10 o'clock on Thursday, the 22nd. It then goes to Caris and myself. Caris will determine whether it's a valid budget in that it's balanced and meets the principles as we've got set out. And I check that it has been submitted in accordance with the Constitution. If that is the case, then it goes on the agenda, it's presented to Council along with Cabinet's recommendations, and then members get the opportunity to consider Cabinet's proposal and the alternative proposal. There isn't an opportunity at that time to scrutinise that budget. That will have been done through the scrutiny and the BREP process that's gone on so far. So, you would assume that any alternative budget put forward has been done in consideration of the scrutiny and the BREP process.
You want another bite of the cherry, do you?
Another bite of the cherry, yes,
okay.
please.
Because I do think I'm allowing it because I think it's important that the process is understood, and then I'll make a final point on it then.
So for me, there is something around, as part of our report pack today, all our consultation documents have gone out to the public for them to have a look at. We wouldn't be able to do that with any amendments, nor would any of the public be consulted on that arrangement either. I think that's completely unfair and untransparent because no member of the public would be able to say whether they agreed or disagreed, irrespective. So we do need to change something. I'm not sure how that would be done. I'm aware that BREP is a unique process to Bridgend to give the opportunity for members to show some consideration and to propose alternatives. So for me, there's something around, we haven't got the right process in place and we do need to review it. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Deputy. What I would say, and I think this is important if members of the public are listening to this meeting, is that we have reviewed the Constitution within the lifetime of this council. So all members had an opportunity. We had the cross-party Democratic Services Committee consider the Constitution. That was chaired by a member of a other group, not a member of the administration, and those recommendations were brought back to this chamber. They were debated, they were discussed, and they were agreed. So the Constitution is as it stands, and therefore any changes to the budget need to be made within the Constitution as it stands today and agreed within this chamber. And I think it would be helpful to know, given that we are just a few days away from bringing the proposals back to this chamber for full council to consider, has an alternative budget yet been submitted by any members, please? Carys.
Thank you, Leader. As you said, within the Constitution, an alternative budget can be brought forward. The deadline for that is 10 o'clock on Thursday this week. As of now, no, I don't have an alternative budget to look at.
And can you advise or confirm, I hope, that members have been reminded about the requirement to set or to propose an alternative budget, that requirement for the proposals to be considered by you as the statutory section 151 finance officer?
Yes, thank you for that. I know not all members sit on the Budget Research and Evaluation panel, but this was discussed by them back in August last year, actually, together with the timeline. And I can confirm that I did liaise with group leaders early in January to remind them that there was an opportunity for them to put in an alternative budget and the timeline associated with that.
Okay, thank you for that, Carys. And I have another question as well, and that is about the use of reserves. You've laid out in the report quite clearly that we will be using a number of reserves this financial year. So that is without even considering any proposals for next year. We will be using reserves this year. We're already winding down reserves. Are you satisfied that we are using those reserves prudently, and that there is no flexibility within those reserves to support the budget next year? Because, of course, most of those reserves, the majority of those reserves are earmarked for specific projects within the capital programme in the main, projects that quite often actually underway as we speak, and therefore those reserves cannot be used in a different way. I think it's important. I know that you discussed that with members, but again, I'm mindful that if the public are listening, they need to understand how those reserves are set aside within the programme.
Thank you for that question, Leader. You're right. The use of the reserves and the level of our reserves is obviously a key issue when we're setting the budget. I mentioned when I presented this report that we're already anticipating drawdown on reserves now during this last quarter. I would stress that those are planned drawdown of reserves. What those do not take in account of is the £10.2 million overspend that a number of people have mentioned this afternoon on this year's budget. So depending on what our actual outturn position is, we will need to draw down on the reserves that we have to fund that. There is nowhere else to fund that overspend this year. I think it's already been referred to. I think the phrase used that we're burning through our reserves, and if we have to pull down that level in 1 year, which is unplanned, really, that is unheard of with regards to Bridgend. We do have reserves, but you're right, Leader. They've been built up over a period of time, and they're earmarked for particular items, particularly within the capital programme. And our current estimate of what we have for the capital programme, for instance, is there's only 3.6 million of those that are left unallocated. Even though on the balance sheet it shows that we've got nearly 49 million, they are all allocated to specific schemes, most of which are actually already underway or in fact have been completed this year, and we will be pulling down those reserves during this year. So whilst we do, and there are directorate reserves as well, but looking at those, many of those are going to be pulled down during this year because they are for planned areas that the services have had, and they will be pulling them down this year. So we are moving through our reserves at a far higher rate than we ever have done before. And I think one important thing to add is that in previous years, and I think Councillor Williams referred to it, we've had underspends and we've been able to put money into reserves. We are burning through these reserves with no position. We're not in a position to replenish those reserves at the moment because of our revenue budget position. So I would be very strongly advising not to use reserves with regards to this year's budget for those reasons.
Thank you for that, and that's your professional advice as the statutory officer, and I know that is your duty to provide that advice. My other question was around the growth in budget. So there is growth in the budgets proposed, mainly in social services, but some growth in education and family support as well. And I wanted to ask, I know we've gone through those budget growth proposals line by line, but are you assured that those pressures are unavoidable? That, for example, they're going to fund the increase in the real living wage that we will need to pay to some of our commissioned services. And also then the other big area of growth, nearly 16 million, I think, in pay and price pressures generally is for pay increases for staff and other price increases. I don't recall, but I just wanted to check that obviously Overview and Scrutiny have not said that we shouldn't fund those pressures. So if we take it as read, which we have, that those pressures are funded, then they have to be funded by a council tax increase, because our funding from Welsh Government has not been adequate to cover those pressures, which total £30 million. So that's my question for you, Carys, please, on the pressures and pay.
Okay, thank you, Leader. It's a large figure, isn't it, trying to find that number of pressures in one financial year? And again, I doubt that that's been experienced here previously. So it is a very valid question. I think there are a number of important elements that are included within those pressures. One is, and we've already mentioned it, we have an overspend in this year's budget. Directors have been asked to pull back that overspend to the best of their ability during this year, but there is a recognition in this budget this afternoon that it is not possible to pull all of that back. Therefore, some of those, for example, the home to school transport and others, have been included as budget pressures for next year in recognition of the significant overspend that is sitting in the budget this year, because it's not possible, and it would be very risky to assume that all of that overspend will actually be made by the 1st of April. So that's one element of those cost pressures that are in there. There's also a £2 million cost pressure in there in relation to the Children's Services Sustainability Plan, which Council signed off in September, and it was agreed across the Chamber then that we needed to invest in those services to ensure that the children and young people in this county borough are safeguarded where that is required. So there's £2 million in there sitting from that decision in Council back in September. As you say, Leader, the increase in the real living wage has a significant impact on this council, particularly because of the level of services that we commission in, and then particularly in social care. And therefore there is significant growth put in those budget pressures to meet those. Otherwise, the service will be unable to commission the services that they need to provide those services to people. So I do think that those are unavoidable. We haven't actually gone out to services to ask for cost pressures. So whereas last year I was able to say to you we'd been asked for, I don't remember the figures off my, but a considerable amount of cost pressures, we'd only funded a small proportion of that. We didn't even ask directors this year for cost pressures because we knew that we didn't have the funding to do it. Pay and price, there is a lot of money in there for those, but we haven't, you're right to say, Leader, there was no challenge with regards to the level of pressures proposed for either pay or price for next year. And we're still thinking that pay is currently still running above the rate of inflation, and we need to ensure that we're able to pay our staff as we move forward. So I think that's a very valid pressure. I think it's something we're going to have to keep a very close eye on with regards to whether there's enough in there to meet that particular pressure, and that will become apparent as we go through the year. So I would just have finished with that, Leader. I think all of those cost pressures in there are unavoidable and are essential if we're going to move forward. If we didn't have those in there, I think you seriously wouldn't have a balanced budget. And the only way we've been able to fund those cost pressures, as you've already said, is by a mixture of the cuts that we are proposing and that 9.5% council tax increase.
And as you've just reminded us all, and we need to keep reminding ourselves, we have to set a balanced budget. And my final question will just be for the monitoring officer to confirm the advice to members, advice about their duties, all our duties in setting a balanced budget for this authority. Kelly, please.
Thank you, Leader. There is a statutory duty on local authorities, and that applies to each individual member to set a balanced budget by the 11th of March. Failure to set a balanced budget would mean the council tax demands cannot be issued, and obviously that would lead to legal and financial consequences for the authority. We would still be obligated to pay our staff, we'd still be obligated to pay any contracts we have, but without that income generation coming in. It would bring the authority into disrepute, and it would be a matter for Carys and myself then to consider our statutory powers and any reports that we needed to serve under our statutory powers.
Thank you for that, Kelly. And I know that's advice that members will consider very carefully. And I would ask them to consider the proposals that we have here today and recognise that none of us want to be in this position where we are proposing a council tax increase and reductions in services, but we cannot identify an alternative. And we do have to set a balanced budget. And that is why I'm supporting the recommendations here today. And I would ask all members to consider supporting these recommendations, because I haven't yet seen a credible, realistic, alternative set of proposals to these proposals here today, and it is our duty to set that balanced budget. Recommendations being moved and seconded. Is everyone in agreement with the recommendations, please? Thank you, colleagues. We'll now take a short comfort break, and we will be back in 10 minutes. Thank you, colleagues.